So Rachel Glazer, thank you so much for joining us on the First Year Married podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So we have a fun origin story about this because you had posted somewhere. Were you responding? Someone had a question and you were responding to it, right?
No, basically what happened was there was a number of posts over, the last few months on the From Girl problems regarding mother-in-laws. And I was able to see that so many of these issues that were coming up were ones that I had researched. And I had the answer to them, or I had great advice, but I don't always like to post on, these internet groups because you kind of get stuck there for hours debating with people, and I don't always have time. So I wrote my own posts and just, kind of shared some of my research that I found regarding this dynamic and this relationship. So that's where you found me after when I posted that short little thing, just giving people short tips of how to navigate this relationship.
Yeah. And also I think what I found really helpful, which we're going to discuss today in this conversation, is really just understanding the different paradigm. So I do this all the time with my clients, with their husbands, right? Like they'll find something very hurtful. And I'm like, can I tell you what that meant in man? Like, let me translate for you what happened. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize, like, correct, because we're speaking different languages. So I felt like a lot of what you're doing is helping us to understand to translate, right? Like what our mothers and mother-in-laws might be experiencing. I do have listeners who have daughters-in-law. So this will be fun too, for them to listen to. And I just I saw that and I just jumped on it. I was like, that's it. It's research, but like, cause you said this is a research paper. I'm like, there's research behind it. It's about mothers-in-law. Like, this is perfect. And she's Jewish. Like, we got to get this going. This is awesome. So thank you so much for just jumping in with me and getting on this conversation.
Of course. And it's actually something that I went into this research. What interested me in the first place was I was really struggling with my relationship with my in-laws. So anyone listening to this saying, well, she doesn't know my mother-in-law, I've been there. There was actually a point in time where me and my in-laws did not talk for about 6 months. Mm-hmm. That's how bad it was. And now we get along great. So I promise these techniques and this just understanding of the developmental stage that the other side is at can really help with just even having the empathy that the other side is going through, both ways, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, can really help kind of just ease tension that might be there or before it begins.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And I think it's important to, at one point, I think we had a conversation. Oh, you know what? I had somebody on to talk about hair covering. Her name's Elisheva Storch. And, she's a very special person, but one thing that she shared, because I think like episode number 3 or something is called Your Mother-in-Law. But other than that, it hasn't come up that often. It comes up in my coaching a lot, but not necessarily on the podcast. But one thing that Elisheva said was that she went into marriage with this idea, like she was going to shed all the cultural stereotypes and jargon about mothers-in-law. And she was just there to love this woman. And she talks about how that really worked for her. So I don't want to preface this, meaning, is it true that many people struggle with this relationship? There's a lot of misunderstanding and that we need the research that you are sharing with us. Yes. At the same time, for those of you who are not married, does this mean that you are doomed to a difficult relationship just by virtue of the fact that she's your mother-in-law? No, for sure not. Right? This is just setting ourselves up for success the way we do with any relationship.
And honestly, in my research, that was one of the big keys to success, is going in with a positive attitude. 86%, I believe I shared it with you, about 86% of people go into a relationship with their spouse with the idea that they're going to have a bad relationship with their mother-in-law. So going in with that attitude definitely sets you up for a bad relationship with your mother-in-law. So one of the major keys is going in saying, this is going to work, and shedding all the pop culture references that we've been inculcated since we're, in toddler years. So that's a huge step up.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go through. You have some amazing points here, and I would love to just let's go. Let's hear what you have to say.
I guess I'll start with, our typical scenario of a boy is living in his mother's house, or let's just say he's in a dorm somewhere for college, but he still brings all his laundry home on weekends. His mother packs him up with everything on his, when he returns after Shabbos, he's got everything for the week. And then he starts dating and he dates her for about, 3 months tops, and he's engaged and married within 6 months. And now all of a sudden he has a new alliance, and the same goes for the girl. And now she is remarried, and they now have to create their own rhythm and realign all their loyalties and reshift everything in their life, really, to this new relationship that they're trying to build. So just a typical example that I like to give is that the mother-in-law calls her son and says, "Hey, would you like to come for Shabbos this week?" And the son says, "Sure, let me just check with my wife. She's the boss." And then the mother-in-law is thinking, "What, I have to ask my daughter-in-law now in order to spend time with my son?" And the daughter-in-law is thinking, "But I'm the wife. Why didn't you call me?" And that's like where sometimes like just a misunderstanding just can start to brew.
So like I'm struggling to follow mother-in-law here.
Okay.
So help me. Cause I'm like, yeah, he got married.
Exactly.
I'm not a mother-in-law yet, obviously. Right. So help, but I'm feeling like, if I'm feeling like this, probably other people listening are also feeling this way. Like why would she think that she just has, I guess because she has his entire life.
That's how they've been doing it for the past 22 years, is like she would call him. And now here, it's not like she's assuming he's coming. She's asking him first. But it's not like he gets married and all of a sudden she knows to just shift this whole relationship over. Like she has to rebuild and redefine and everything, her relationship with her son.
Right.
And also a lot of times, if this is her first child getting married, she hasn't done this before.
Right.
So also, it's hard for me to speak on that because my oldest is 8. So like, I'm not a mother-in-law yet, so I can't fully understand, but I can imagine that it's
not an overnight shift.
Maybe he used to have a hard day and call his mother. Now he's not anymore. He's calling his wife.
Right.
All these new things that like, she already feels like she's been pulled away from him. And I can just imagine, like, I do everything for my kids. I can't imagine a day where they're not going to need me anymore or not going to want me in their life. And I guess it could feel like that when a son gets married and all of a sudden, like, he's so busy with his own little life that the mother, who's just spent her past 22 years devoted to his every need, is shunned to the side.
Right. Also, that the person who's making the decision that he's checking with is someone that she hasn't had time to build a relationship with. So maybe she doesn't know where she stands. Exactly. So I could see that also being like very scary. Like, but what if she just always says no? What if she doesn't let me like see my son? I had a friend who was like riding the postpartum hormones at one point. she's holding her like 3-year-old boy, right? And we're sitting together in her house, and she's like, one day he's gonna get married and his wife is gonna hate me.
I think that all the time. My son threatens me and says, when I get married, I'm never coming to visit you. And I say, okay, thanks for letting me know.
It'll really be up to your wife.
They know exactly what buttons to push that hurts you the most.
Right, exactly. Okay, so that's actually really helpful for me to start to piece this together, meaning I've experienced the daughter-in-law piece. I can understand feeling like, excuse me, wait, he married me, he's mine, like a bit territorial almost, right? Which probably is not ideal. But then, also as the mother of a boy, like seeing that you invest so much. And then also, one of the things we talk about in this podcast a lot is that your pattern of thinking is going to repeat itself, right? If you've been practicing a certain way of thinking, you can't just shift it unless there is a traumatic experience. A wedding is not a traumatic experience, thank goodness. Right. So she's not going to suddenly start just feeling and thinking differently about her son just because she sat there and watched you get married.
Exactly. And even the week before the wedding, it's still, she's taking care of all the flowers and all the musician, and she's doing everything. And then she's supposed to like say, okay, goodbye. Like,
right. Even Sheva Bracha is like, they're doing all that. It's like ramping up. And then, and
then you cut it off.
Okay. I'm feeling a lot of compassion right now. This is good. This is the point.
That's one of the keys, is understanding. So one of the main reasons it's important to nurture this relationship and to make sure that it goes off on the right foot is, it used to be that a woman would define herself based on her husband's status in the community and his honor and his role. Whereas after the feminist movement, women started to define themselves based on their own merits and they're really mainly their relationship with others. And this was all studied by Erickson. And so when the mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws were approached by these, by all these studies that I researched, they defined their relationships with their mother-in-law or daughter-in-law based on their own self-worth. Meaning they would say, the daughter-in-law might say, well, I guess I'm just a horrible mother and a daughter-in-law because I just can't get along with my mother-in-law and it makes me feel so horrible about myself. Whereas, and the mother-in-law the same, like my son must hate me. So they really take it personally and it impacts their own self-image. So making sure that this relationship that can be very precarious is well nurtured and is doing wonders, not only just for your family and your spouse, but for yourself and your own image as well.
It's really interesting. And it's so interesting to see how this relationship was affected by like what's going on in the world outside, right? That the feminist movement actually sounds like made it almost more important than it was before, because before, if it's like, I'm great because look at the kind of guy I married, then the mother-in-law is not going to affect that so much.
Exactly. And now it's really important, as with every relationship, but something that makes this relationship so hard is what is called the linchpin relationship, meaning that you are both attached through the son, through your husband. Without him, the two of you would probably never cross paths and become friendly. Even, for example, I have friends who are in their 60s, many of them, but it's a different relationship. We're peers. She's not my mother-in-law. So this dynamic is not natural. It's not organic. So it can really, it takes extra work because it's not like, oh, I met this great person and we have a great time hanging out. It's you need to work on a relationship that probably doesn't come naturally. And it isn't a peer. It is someone higher. It's a hierarchy. You do need to respect her on a different level than you would a friend.
Right. You can't just like cut her, like, unless you're dealing with a seriously dysfunctional situation. It's not like you could be like, well, I've just moved on. Like we don't connect. We're not so close. Like this person is built in. I always say to people, like, your husband's a package deal. And we know that our marriage partner is, like, from a spiritual perspective, supposed to help us grow and achieve whatever we don't realize we need to grow and achieve. But like one man's not really enough. He usually needs to like come with some circumstances. So like, it might be like, the extended family, or it might be the financial situation or whatever. So yeah. And I definitely relate to that thought of like, you very intentionally choose this marriage partner, you choose your husband, you're thinking that through. And then along with him comes the relationship that you most didn't choose out of all of the relationships possibly in your entire life. Even if you take a job, you're going to check if like, could I work for this person? Right. And so we don't really have so many experiences with, such a close relationship that is so not chosen. And then to have it so dramatically contrasted with your marriage partner, which you made the most specific decision.
Exactly. Interesting, but it's true. And just to elaborate on what you said before, I often find that people will throw around the term toxic. It's a toxic relationship all the time on social media. Yes, I don't even have the words to describe how much it irks me because all relationships require work, especially this one. Just because you don't get along with your mother-in-law, or she sends, if you having a rough spot with her, does not mean it's toxic. It means you might need to put in a little more effort. Obviously, always ask a third party and, a trusted rabbi or a trusted mentor or a guidance, like a counselor like you. But it's not necessarily toxic because you guys butt heads once in a while. It just means you might need a little bit more work on the relationship.
Yeah. And I think this maybe goes without saying, but as a reminder, those of us who are on social media, when we're on social media, our brains are seeking drama and excitement, which means it's way more likely that you're going to have somebody responding to your post saying, this is toxic, she sounds like a narcissist or whatever. Exactly. Than if you're speaking to a third party who has been through it and who really knows you, and also really your best interest is from what you're saying so far. And I know from what we're going to be discussing, like it's in our best interest to have a healthy, positive relationship here. And if I'm feeling a little off about my relationship with my mother-in-law, it might be easier for me to go tell everyone else, look how difficult this is, look how toxic it is. Really, we should just cut ties than, to do the work. So
posting about your mother-in-law on social media, especially if it's not anonymous, is not helpful for your relationship.
I would say even if it's anonymous. I mean, there's like, have either of us ever seen a post about a mother-in-law that didn't have somebody saying you need more boundaries, get her out of your life, tell your husband to cut her out? Always.
Or I'll see people post in the comments, oh, my mother-in-law did this. Your mother-in-law's friends are in this group. Your mother-in-law might be in this group. It's not going to help your relationship to badmouth her or to put any private information onto the internet.
Right.
Right.
I do always like to think like, there's got to be some karma here too. I'm hoping, right? Like every time you don't make that post that like, it would feel pretty great, to get it off your chest and to get all that, that support and the people being like, yeah, like we're in this together. You don't say it. Maybe that means your daughter-in-law will be a little more careful also with your flaws when she comes along.
Sure.
Okay. So you in your research, you had talked about the in-law relationship with the correlation with marital harmony. So we talked about the female self-image part. I'm very interested to hear the marital harmony part.
Okay, so this was actually interesting because one would think that a mother-in-law having a difficulty with your mother-in-law might come up if you were having difficulty with your spouse, meaning that if me and my spouse were fighting, it could be I would have more discord with his mother-in-law or with his family of origin. It actually found the opposite, that having discord with his family of origin and, tension between you and your in-laws will lead to more marital disharmony. So in order to secure a happy marriage, it's so important for you to nurture that relationship and to work on it with his family of origin, and the vice versa as well with the husband and your family. So if they're, for your husband and for yourself, finding the good in your family of origin or not complaining to your spouse about your issues with them will make your marriage so much happier and less tension filled.
When I read this in the essay, I was like, in the paper, I was like, I'm not exactly sure. Like, like how exactly do we do the predictor versus product? How do we clarify like which came first? But hearing you say it here and having coached hundreds of women, I'm like, oh, this is ringing all the bells. How many times have I had someone say, we just don't get along, but his parents are so great. I've heard that several times, that she's struggling in the marriage, but she feels really strongly connected to her in-laws. And it's like even harder for her to be struggling in the marriage because she doesn't want, to lose that whole relationship. I've heard that multiple times, not to say that every time someone's struggling, they also get along, but that is like, I'm hearing all those times before. And then at the same time, how many times, I've coached women who either, usually not there, who have challenges with their in-laws more often, or more recently, I guess what I've seen more is like, when one spouse doesn't want the other person talking about their parents anymore, right? Or like, they don't want that conflict between them, and I like to talk about it a little bit. Like, I mean, obviously we have Lashon Hara as a pretty main element. And I think what's sort of the most maybe easy to visualize idea is like when we're complaining about the people in our lives with our spouse, it's kind of like secondhand smoke to the relationship. Right? It's like, how much negativity are you just like creating between the two of you when what else could you be doing with that conversation? What else could you be doing with that energy? He's just not the person to go to with that frustration.
Right. And understand that this is their previous alliance and their previous allegiances were to their family of origin. So one way to get your husband to connect to you is not to bash them and to put them down. I mean, it can work maybe, but is that how you want your husband to connect to you? By convincing him that his family of origin is, so dysfunctional, right, and they're, and your mother-in-law, your mother did to me today, or your sister.
Not normal. They're not normal.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, yeah. They're just right. Exactly. So it's actually interesting. Well, something that I found interesting was that there's more tension within the Orthodox community because we have such a strong allegiance to our families in terms of hashkafa and tradition, and the way, even my husband and I were talking, like, even does your family eat their herring and then wash, or do they wash and then eat their, but simple things like that can cause like you feel so strongly. But that's how I grew up, and everyone wants to recreate the home that they grew up in. So that also can lead to a lot more discord, because we have so many more traditions that we're attached to, even on a subconscious level, that can, you know, or even making the potato kugel the way your mother made the potato kugel. Here's a good story. I once was 7 months pregnant, and I must have been more than that. I must have been like 8.5 months pregnant, not the point. And I had 2 babies at home, and I stood by the stove and I fried latkes. And what did my husband say to me? That's not the way my mother makes them. I left the house sobbing. I was like, here I am, and I'm making the latkes the best I can. It's not how your mother makes them. And it was like, obviously I was very hormonal at the time, but it's something simple like that. Like the way you make your latkes can cause such
that also goes into the difference between male-female communication, right? Because a lot of times with guys, and I think I should say this because this comes up a lot with the mother-in-law, is that men make observations and they are not laced with criticism.
Exactly.
We do the lacing. Women do the lacing. We're very good at that. We can say anything. We could say, is that what you're wearing? Really? And it's not a question. It's a statement. Right. It's a criticism, right? But if your husband is like, is that what you're wearing? He just wants to know, like most 99% of the time, men are speaking, the way I say it is on the line, not between the line, right? And so he's just standing there noticing, oh, new woman, latkes. My mother makes them differently, right? And we're like, how could you? So I'm so glad you gave that example, because we've heard this, you know, not with latkes, but with many things so many times, that especially in those first couple of years when you're still building up your confidence in the relationship and you feel like everything feels so fragile, it's so easy to take everything the wrong way and to just assume that this is all a criticism.
Exactly. So that was actually a point that I researched, was that people who have a good relationship with their in-laws or their mother-in-law tended to take these what could be determined and perceived as a hurtful comment, and they contribute it towards an external factor. So if generally things are good, then if your mother-in-law says something that could be determined as hurtful, you'll say she must just be overtired. Whereas if that relationship is tense, even a simple comment like, fill in the lines, I can't think of one right this second.
I'm surprised you didn't make fish this Shabbos.
Exactly. I'm surprised will be perceived as a hurtful attack. Whereas it was just, like you said, it was just a statement. It was on the line, like she didn't mean it as hurtful. So being able to contribute these things to an external factor, even if you have to make it up, like in your head, you know, sometimes when you're trying to be down the kasachot and you come up with some crazy story in your head to not be upset at someone, just apply it here, because you know, you want to have that good relationship with them. And like you said, like we don't usually change our way of thinking unless a traumatic experience happens. So if we could just train our brain to take all comments that could be perceived as hurtful and contribute it elsewhere, it always takes 2 to tango. So then don't tango, don't do it. And it definitely will ease that tension.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm thinking about when you're saying external factors. One thing that I see that my husband and I do a lot, because we're very interested in different personality type systems, right? Especially the DISC is the one that we like the most, which we actually got from his father. But in terms of any of them, I feel like, you know, a lot of people are really into Enneagram or Myers-Briggs. It's a really fun external factor that you could use for anyone in any situation, right? Because you could be like, oh, that felt like a critical comment, but I know that this person is an S. And so, or a C. And so they're a bit more of a perfectionist, or they're a 1. And so they're more of a perfectionist. They're more likely to notice and comment on things. This isn't me. This is them being a 1. This is them being a C. Right. And so for anyone else, I know there's a lot of women who are very into these things, like use it with your in-laws, because I think one of the things that helped me the most was getting curious about them as human beings outside of the relationship. What are they into? What's their personality like? What's their background like? And just sort of like almost in a, like, not in a scientific way, but just being curious about them and what makes them tick, it gave me more to think about than just our direct relationship.
Exactly. Or for sure. And that's something I think about all the time is that, you know, you're meeting your mother-in-law, but she may have had 55 years of her own baggage, so to speak, that she's bringing with her. So let's just say she has abandonment issues to begin with. Maybe one of her parents passed away at a young age. Maybe, you know, it could be that there's a whole life story. So her son leaving her can really be a trigger for her. So this is just a simple analogy, but there are so many backstories that, you know, could possibly be playing a role, and creating that empathy for that person behind the mother-in-law can really, really help.
That's a really great point. Like, we don't know what they're going through. And I think sometimes there's this attitude, like, as if by virtue of being a mother-in-law, she should have already worked out all of her stuff. Like, she's not allowed to be human anymore and to still have challenges, right? Like, that's just for us. We're allowed to have the challenges, but everyone else is supposed to have their act together.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, she could just be having a really terrible, maybe she did cross the line. Maybe she is messing up a little bit, but like, so what?
We all,
yeah.
I know, we think of our parents as like these supernatural beings that don't make mistakes. Whereas then you become a parent and you realize, I have no idea what I'm doing. Exactly. So one point that really helped me was understanding the developmental stages that both sides are going through. The same way, for example, if your 3-year-old or 2.5-year-old, if she's precarious, wants to do everything by herself, either you can think, she doesn't love me anymore, I don't understand, why does she hate me? Or you can realize that they need their own autonomy and that, like, this is perfectly healthy and perfectly normal. You aren't upset at them, you understand. So I find that we often think developmental stages end at, you know, once you hit teenage years, you hit adulthood, but they continue. And another reason this relationship can often be fraught is because mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws are at completely opposite developmental stages. And when they get married, those stages change and they need to work around each other in order to be able to hit those stages. So a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law need to realign all their, you know, their priorities and their allegiances from their family of origin to their new young couple family. And in order to do that, they need an insane amount of autonomy. They need to be able to work out with each other where they're going for Yontif. They need to work out with each other, you know, what kind of cereal they buy. They're budgeting everything. And mother-in-laws are at the place where they need to release that autonomy and stop parenting their child to the same way they did a month ago. They need to, or a few years ago, they need to release that. And they're hitting the stage of being able to accept their developmental stage that they should be sliding into is being able to give over the knowledge that they've accumulated. But what happens? They try giving over their knowledge. A daughter-in-law might be like, we're figuring this out by ourselves, you know, or the son-in-law is like, we need to figure this out. And those stages clash so much, which can create so much tension. I wish I had had this information as a newlywed. I wish. And it's so hard.
So what does it mean exactly that I'm hearing the young couple part, like what they really need is that autonomy. And I think that might be so helpful and like reassuring for mothers-in-law to hear that, who are listening to this, that like, okay, they need to go through this process. And this is why they don't even want to hear about, I have an extra 5 boxes of cereal because I got the sale and they don't even want me to drop it off at their house. Like, it's just, why wouldn't they want that? You know? And but I understand, like they're able to, then they could go to this developmental stage concept and understand like they are in a process of creating their autonomy, of defining their relationship for themselves. That's where this is coming from. Beautiful. What does it mean exactly that the mother-in-law is in a developmental stage? It's that she needs to impart her knowledge and wisdom, like, or that's what's natural to her at this point?
He's no longer doing his laundry. She is no longer cooking his supper. She is no longer the person that he calls and she's reassuring him at the end of the day. What does she have? She has all this knowledge that she has accumulated through all of her life. And I'm pretty sure if I look it up, a lot of this is actually in, I think it's Erickson's developmental stages that like goes all the way until, you know, till death. And what do they have at this point? Many of them are at a retiring stage. They're no longer actively busy within their community. And what they have is their knowledge that they've had that they've accumulated over their life. And they still want to contribute. So what they're trying to contribute their knowledge. Now, even something simple, like this is, I'm sure happens in so many of your clients, that the mother-in-law says your baby has the hiccups. Why don't you give her some water in the bottle? And the daughter-in-law is horrified. All my baby books say we don't put water in a bottle. It's all just, I mean, like, it's generational. Whereas the mother-in-law she wants to feel needed. She wants to feel as if you respect her as a person. So interesting. I loved this. Many of the daughter-in-laws, their main complaints were that their mother-in-laws were intrusive or attacked them as a person or their family of being, or that they're so outdated. And what would you think that the mother-in-law's main complaint was? Their new daughter-in-law is so modern. That actually wasn't it. It was the mother-in-law's main complaint was that they felt judged by their daughter-in-laws. They wanted to be accepted. Again, I don't know exactly when this study was done. There isn't that much research out there, actually.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
I delved into almost every single study that had been done within the past 60 years. So this could have been from significantly long ago. But I think that the point stands true that it's a universal need to feel accepted and to feel wanted. So by showing your mother-in-law that you appreciate her as a person and that she's valuable to you, will do a lot more wonders than whether or not you follow her advice on everything she gives you.
Right.
Wow.
That's a really great point.
Common one is putting your baby in the pack and play while you make supper, which is just not done as much these days. Your babies roam the house. My mother-in-law cannot understand why my children are not in the pack and play. And I'm like, if you put them in a pack and play, they will either scream bloody murder or they'll have climbed out within 30 seconds. So it's simple things where the mother-in-law tries to impart her knowledge. The daughter-in-law is horrified because that's not the way things are done anymore. Whereas we can just give them the respect. The main key criteria that they found for a healthy, positive relationship between the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, and I can imagine the same as mother-in-law, son-in-law, although that wasn't my research, was respect. Valuing the other person and showing a mutual respect and being, and even with a difference of values and opinions, showing respect and answering in a way that gives, that values the other person as a human being, even if you don't agree with their opinion, is the key. So
interesting. And I think that as the daughter-in-law, because you start off with that relationship feeling kind of insecure with your husband and wanting to sort of see where it's going, it's almost meaning the way that people think about their mothers-in-law, I feel like is so much naturally can be so much less respectful than they would if it was the exact same person that was a coworker or the exact same person that was a secretary at their child's school. We're so good. Everyone is so good at choosing to respect someone. We're so good at coming up with no, but here's all their good points. Women especially are very, very good at that, right? We can say, well, they've been through so much in their life and and right. And it's just this, I feel like it's kind of this almost this feeling of threat between the two, right? Of who's going to get him? That's what I hear a lot. Is she calls him all the time. Is she going to take his attention from me? Is she more important than me? And I know vice versa. You're giving the example of I have my daughter-in-law decides if I see my son for Shabbos, right? So there's that kind of tension where we forget, you're saying, such a good reminder. If you just choose to sit for a second and think intentionally, what has this person been through in their life? What challenges do I know that they've overcome? There's always room to find respect, even if you don't agree with how they're navigating every detail of the relationship right now.
Exactly. And it's not our place to fix them, so to say. 100%. Even if our relationship is somewhat unhealthy, let's just say that a son really does have an unhealthy relationship with his mother. Let's just say, then it's a third party. You can get a third party involved to help work on that, but it's not the wife's place. If you're really concerned, hire a coach, hire a therapist, have a Rav, someone intervene. But as the wife, you're not their therapist. You're not their, it's as much as we might want to fix things because we realize that there's an issue, it's not your voice.
No, and it doesn't help. It's not going to help. It's not going to help with you and your husband. It's like much
Exactly.
Third parties are wonderful. I'm so glad you're promoting them. I'm a big fan.
Oh, for sure.
Who can we get in on this before this becomes a conflict? Like, we don't need to be having a fight over this. Let's just bring in the right person and we can keep moving. Also, there's a big piece with husbands is that usually a man is going to think very carefully about who he's willing to go to for a given thing.
Yes.
And therefore, if he's going to a Rav, he's already decided to accept what the Rav says, by and large. Does that always happen? No, not always, but they're more particular. Men tend to be more particular about who they ask. This is why they don't want to ask directions from just any random person, because why would I trust that random person, right? And so it also helps with that, because if you come in with your opinion about it, well, you just got a mother-in-law for the first time 3 months ago. Who says you know what you should do with mothers-in-law, right? Where like, it's like the Rav, he's chosen him. He's willing to hear it. Even if it's difficult for him to hear, he's much more likely to be makabel whatever the Rav says than if it's just you spouting it off. Yeah,
for sure. And exactly. And it's not you creating the tension. It's coming from a third party. Like you're still a unified group, and this is the other person, as opposed to you and him against each other, which definitely
yes
for sure.
That's beautiful. I love that. Okay, amazing.
One other thing is just that I think would be helpful is that the difference between communication styles tends to alternate between generations, whereas there was a generation, I think it was the post-Holocaust generation, that tended to not talk about anything that might have brought up any conflict. And the next generation wanted to talk about everything because their parents didn't. So whenever conflict arose, they wanted to tackle it headstrong. But the next generation did not want to tackle those. Saying like, they were like, oh my gosh, this reminds me of I'm being attacked by my parents all over again. So, and then what happens generation after that? They want to talk about everything. So
oh my goodness,
understanding others' communication styles and knowing that your mother-in-law might not be attacking you. She's just coming to you because that's how she deals with conflict. She talks about it, and understanding that your daughter-in-law might feel attacked by it, even if that's not your intention, and understanding the different communication styles that the two of you might have that could butt heads kind of. I think that many of this can be addressed even at the beginning of the relationship. Like, honestly, like to sound instant to your new daughter-in-law and say, hi, I want to have I'm so excited for you to come into my family. If there's anything I do or say that might hurt you, please come to me. Please let me know. Obviously that's not my intention. Like even just like getting it off, putting it open in the air first, like addressing it before it becomes an issue. So that way it's, you could say like, please don't involve my husband if like there's an issue, or my son, depending on who's speaking. And let's just figure this out together. Like we can make this relationship work. Because obviously there's so many deeper levels to this relationship that, as I said, it's not organic. It's not a natural relationship. It's not like even the person you're sitting next to at work, you're in the same line of business. So you already have things in common and shared interests. With your mother-in-law, like for example, my mother-in-law, we have almost nothing in common. And I say nothing, like nothing to talk about. It's hard. Now we have the grandkids, which is great. But again,
that helps a lot.
Suggestions and her input. And I really do work on that. So if she suggests something and she's over at my house, I'll do it. Will some water in a baby's bottle kill them? No, they'll be okay. And it makes her happy. You want me to burp the baby over my shoulder instead? Okay. So things like that can really help. And just to end off, I would love to share like basically what happened with my relationship. I really want to, for anyone here that's listening that may already be in a really bad place with their mother-in-law, what I did, it worked for me. I am not going to say that it was easy. What I did was, after we had a really big blowout with my in-laws, and I did not see them for 6 months, for the sake of my children and my husband, I really wanted to mend the relationship. And I knew it had to come from me because it just wasn't going to happen otherwise. I got my mother-in-law a present, and I wrote her a note saying that I am very sorry for the hurt that I caused. I did not apologize for what I did because I was not sorry. Was I wrong? Probably, but I wasn't sorry. So I didn't want to give an empty apology. And I apologized for the hurt that I caused. And I forgave them for the hurt that they caused. And that was huge because it took me a long time to do that. And I forgave them because for the sake of my own relationship with my husband and the relationship with my children, it was more important than who was right and who was wrong. Like I said, it always takes two to tango. So I chose to move past it and move forward. And I was too nervous. I had my husband give them the gift when he went, because at that point I still wasn't visiting them. And my husband still went every Sunday with the kids to visit them. And I chose to do my schoolwork at home. And I am happy to say at this point, my in-laws are actually coming to stay with me for a full month soon. And I'm okay with it. Like, I'm fine with that. I'm excited to see them. So there is hope to, mending that relationship and going forward with a positive one, no matter how toxic you might deem the relationship. So it's never that, it's already ruined. You can fix it. Like, it's important too. It's definitely, you should make it a priority.
I'm so glad you're sharing that, because I think that some people, like, sometimes we just need that extra push, extra, like, this is possible. You could do it. I'm sure you felt so uncomfortable. I'm sure it's not what you were in the mood to do. There's no day where you wake up and you're like, I'm just gonna
move past it today. Today I'm gonna wake up, and it took me months. It took months to move past it. Yeah. And I needed to, because my children deserve a good relationship with their grandparents. And that's not going to happen if I don't speak to them. And my husband deserves a good relationship with his parents. And again, like, it's up to you. Like, it's not like the coworker that you can, like you said, you can't just say, hey, we just lost touch. And like, it just, you're good friends with some time and it's just not working for me anymore. No, like, this is your in-laws. You need to make it work.
Yeah. Amazing. I'm so happy that you shared that story. Thank you so much.
It was definitely,
this was amazing. Okay. I love what you covered. I think that, like, especially talking about those developmental stages and understanding where our mothers-in-law are coming from, and also the empathy factor, the respect factor, like, bringing that in and keeping that front and center will be so helpful for so many people. So
okay. I wish I had podcasts and all these things were around like 12 years ago. How amazing would that have been, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm like somewhat jealous of all your listeners that they had this forum.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, such a pleasure.